Hi, I'm TJ Randall, the Chief Customer Experience Officer here at Instruqt. So we're excited to have Anurag Gupta here with us today, who is the co-founder of Calyptia. And one of the things we're going to be talking a lot about today is observability and how that's starting to play an increasing key role in this cloud era of ours. So first and foremost, Anurag, why don't you let us know who you are and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much again for having me here. Again, my name's Anurag. I'm one of the co-founders at Calyptia. I've been in what is now called the observability space for about 10 years. Started my career at Microsoft. We used this product called System Center, which was for monitoring your Windows, Unix, Linux servers at giant scale. And then that slowly evolving over time in my career as well to Azure Log Analytics, to then moving into treasure data, and then finally a large breadth of open source within all of those to Elastic, and finally here at Calyptia. So observability in the blood, been in for a while. And I always like to start off because many folks might be coming in like, I keep hearing this buzzword. I keep seeing observability. What exactly is it? What does it mean when this person says they're working in observability? And the way I like to start it off, or at least explain it a little bit as to where I fit within the broad software ecosystem, is, as we move more and more things to cloud, or more and more software is being built, we always want to make sure that software is up and readily available. It doesn't matter if you're a small business and you just have a website running, you're still delivering some sort of software to your end users. It doesn't matter if it's a menu, it doesn't matter if it's a website, hours. Those are kind of software delivery pieces. And observability, the way that I like to define it, is this holistic overview of how a system is operating and functioning in benefit for the end user being able to consume and utilize that at a very good and healthy scale. And before, we used to call it maybe monitoring, where we're looking exactly and we're watching to see if something is functioning properly. That's where I would put our system center days. Then when we move to things like Azure Log Analytics, you have so much data, you have so many different metrics and logs. It's very hard to know exactly what to look for in a system where things might malfunction. And so you've got to kind of become that thing that can search the needle in the haystack. Same thing with Elastic, and now with Calyptia. As we're functioning in there, that needle in the haystack, it's no longer just a haystack. It's fields, it's continents of data, and it's still that needle that we're searching for. And there's more types of data, not just logs. It's metrics, it's traces, it's profiles, it's all sorts of kind of a conglomeration of all of this. And so that's where observability as a practice, it really fits in. So there's my long answer of who I am and what I've done in terms of observability.
No, that's great. You obviously have some experience there and understanding. It sounds like things have changed as well, right? It's not just monitoring anymore. This thing, this observability is actually a really important thing for customers to think about in terms of like finding issues and figuring out how to solve them quickly.
Exactly. So it's, I'll go back to that analogy from earlier, where you have all of these things that are going on within a system. You're trying to deliver a healthy and good experience to your end users. And if something goes wrong, for example, your website goes down, you're losing out on all of these users who are going to be able to interact, consume, have some sort of experience with your service. And so from an observability side, it's not just about the reactivity, but how can you look at these issues before they occur? How can you look at these and investigate what caused, maybe your menu in S3 to go down if you're a restaurant, or what caused your website to go down, what caused your application to collapse, and being able to identify those root causes is a really key point of it.
Hmm. And so for observability, like thinking about the market for this and probably what's changed since the pandemic as well, right? That's obviously some impact there. Like, what is it about Calyptia that gives a customer that edge? I know it was born out of the Fluent Bit project, so like thinking about like that, like what's different about it to say like we can really help you solve your problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I'll even take a step back. For us, who are we as Calyptia? We are the creators and maintainers of two very popular open source projects, Fluent Bit and Fluent D. These are both cloud native computing foundation projects. So if you've heard of Kubernetes, you're using Kubernetes, that's a graduated first project in the CNCF. Side by side are things like Prometheus, things like Istio, things like Envoy, and Fluent D and Fluent Bit are a part of that same ecosystem at that graduated level. Now, these two projects, when we look at their context in terms of observability, one of the first challenges that comes with observability is how do I get my data? I have a ton of it. It's there. I have metrics. I have apps running. I have all these services. But how do I check or look at what logs are hitting me? How do I look at the metrics? How do I look at the traces? And FluentBit and FluentD have been created to collect all that data and route it to the appropriate location. Now, in the past, a lot of the times, the observability vendor that provided you with those really nice graphs and visualizations were providing the same collection mechanisms. And unfortunately, the downside is if you ever wanted to switch vendors, you'd have to switch the collection mechanism. You'd have to
Mhm.
switch all of the agents, all of the stuff that you're doing in order to route it to a new location. So FluentD and FluentBit started to challenge that paradigm about 10, now it's been 12 years since FluentD was out, to say, hey, we can take multiple different sources and send it to multiple different destinations. We can decouple, we can make a vendor neutral layer that can grab and route this data from point A to point B. And us as Calyptia, we saw that trend with FluentD first, as many of us are the creators and maintainers of both projects. And then we saw Fluent Bit rising as well, and many cloud providers adopting it as part of their strategy for collecting observability data. And we said, there's a lot more that we can build at this collection layer. We need, of course, need to make sure that we can invest properly in these open source projects, and by building compelling features, things that users will like. So Calyptia, the way we stand is we've built these really powerful open source technologies, FluentD and FluentBit, and now we provide tools on top to really streamline the use of them for large scale, high performance. We have users that send 7 petabytes a day,
Mm.
with FluentBit, and it's just a massive amount of data. And from Calyptia's side, it's not just about sending it, it's how can we enrich that data, redact that data, process that data in a meaningful way to give users the ability to get the most value for what they have, versus them just paying an upfront fee of, yeah, I'm sending 5 gigs. One megabyte of that 5 gigs might be the most useful. And
Right.
that's really where we try to help out.
Right. That relevancy of the data and the making it consistent. Excellent. So one of the things I'm hoping we can do today is we can deep dive a little bit more on your go-to-market strategy. And one of the things I think about kind of often is almost like, what does the pain look like in an organization? Like, what are they trying to solve, right, with a solution like this? And I was thinking maybe one of the things we can talk about, like DevRel, and like how does that relate to things like leadership and reporting and metrics and visibility, right? All those buzzwords that you hear, but they're important. I think you just alluded to it there, right? We can give you lots of data, but what does that mean? So thinking about that, kind of like what does that pain look like in the organization, and how do they talk about it today?
Yeah, really good question. From our view, especially on the open source side, folks will come in and say the most basic things is I need to go from A to B. I need to send data from Kubernetes to Kafka, Kubernetes to XYZ backend. And that as a kind of basic type of question comes in as it's hard. It's like you get stuck reading all this documentation. Potentially the vendor has a solution baked in. And as
Mhm.
soon as you want to do from A to B, maybe A to B and C, oh, it becomes this gigantic upheaval and ripping out of roots of agents and things that you've installed. So that kind of beginning part is where many users will look at what's out available, open source, easy to adjust. They can look at the code, they can mess with the
Mm.
code. they want a vendor neutral open source strategy. And that's where we'll find many users landing into Fluent Bit to say, hey, I heard about this. I like Kubernetes. I like the CNCF. I see Fluent D as part of that same ecosystem. How do I make use of this technology?
I see. And so as we roll that up, so that's kind of the pain that the developers and the engineers are feeling. And to your point, it's kind of like the constant process of, like, you're building a house, but then you have to change the wiring system or something. I don't know, whatever bad analogy
I
we
love
want to
it.
use.
I love
You
it.
know,
Yeah, no,
but
that's a good one.
is that a good? Okay, good. But from a leadership perspective, I sometimes think about, like, how does that translate, that kind of pain, they're almost on the front lines, to like a leader saying, "Hey, I need to make an investment. I need to solve this problem." And what does it look like there? What does that conversation look like there?
Yeah, it should be. I think typically with what I'll find in open source is you'll kind of have like the shadow IT or the small champions who are doing their bit of research. And I think open source is a great kind of catalyst to help that, in the sense of you can try it out on your laptop, you can try it out immediately online, follow a tutorial on a personal laptop, and it's not going to cause the enterprise any harm from an audit or a license or trial, whatever it may
Yep.
be.
Yep.
And I think once you've gained enough confidence in it, the leader that will come in is also looking and saying, from either a cost perspective, I need to reduce the volume of data. They might come in from a vendor neutral strategy perspective, that we've encountered so much pain with XYZ vendor. We can't have that as we go to the next vendor or the next vendor. We can't be locked in. As an organization, we have to have freedom to move, whether it's cloud providers. So that's, multi-cloud strategy is something that we'll see at many organizations. You'll need a multi-vendor strategy for all of your data. It's your data at the end of the day, right? It's
Yeah.
not a vendor creating that for you.
Right. Right. And so it sounds like even developer experience flows a little bit there, where the leader is thinking about, okay, we have some cost center, things to think about, but we also have to make sure that the developers have a great experience as they implement their solutions. Is that something that you also run into as well?
Exactly. It's I would frame it a little of what is already working or what is the industry using comes into play.
Mm,
Sometimes, especially now, as we look at like hiring velocity in organizations, as they look at onboarding new DevOps, DevSecOps, whatever engineer they need, the big part comes in, like, how can that person ramp up as quickly as possible? And the reality is, when you use something that's proprietary, you're fully reliant on that vendor or ecosystem that vendor has produced to learn that technology. And if you need to change something, again, you're reliant on that vendor. If something goes wrong with that vendor, you are at the whims and mercy of what that vendor has produced. But with open source and taking a really deep look into that, this produces a level of, hey, we can go take a training course from A, we can take a training course from B. There's 4 or 5 companies that support this. This is used within internal infrastructure elsewhere. If we want to re-commercialize this, put it as part of our product, we can. And it helps with developer onboarding, helps with that developer experience. If that person needs help, there's a community of thousands and thousands. I mean, we have about 8,500 folks in our Fluent
wow.
Slack channel. So it's a great place to kind of dive deep and find like-minded folks who are trying to solve similar problems. We'll have community meetings where folks will present about how they solved just this really bespoke challenge, that with proprietary software, of course, you're going to have it with webinars and potential guides, but with open source, it's just a naturally occurring
Hmm.
thing, and people are more than willing to share because the software is free.
Yep. It sounds like you've built a community where, if TJ, a developer, am now starting to implement your solutions, I can go there and say, well, I can't just use the open source one on my laptop. I'm doing it within a regulated environment, for example. Has anyone else out there struggled with X? It sounds like your community is engaged in that way as well, to say, oh yeah, we solved that one here. We're working on that here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we love to emphasize and rave about our successful users, as I'm sure any organization would. We had conferences, so FluentCon, folks speaking from like Fidelity, Neiman Marcus, Zendesk, all sorts of large organizations doing this at massive scale. And a part of it is like, look how we solved it. And there's also, I always appreciated a humbleness for folks who will also ask, like, how are others looking at this at the end of their presentation? Like,
Yeah.
we're interested in how others are. And one example that we just had a Open Observability Day, a side-by-side conference with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. All the sessions, by the way, that I mentioned are all recorded online on YouTube, so you're more than welcome to watch them. A gentleman from LinkedIn presented about how they're using Fluent Bit as an observability agent. And after the chat, there was a lot of great dialogue about where can he offload some of those particular functions or move some of the logic that perhaps exists today in Kafka over to FluentBit,
Hmm.
vice versa. And I think that's really important where there's not everything must be done with a particular vendor, because here, it's open source. All this stuff
Yeah.
um, is ripe for the taking and open for experimentation. There's no, you must use it in this way or you're not supported.
Well, it sounds like that talk was it really resonated with people in the sense that they were hearing not only best practices, but also they were getting the opportunity to say, "Hey, here are the challenges I'm facing. Did you experience this?" Or like, "What should I look out for?"
Exactly. It's super interesting, and I think there's a piece of it that is super unique to open source that occurs in these conference talks or even just general discussion where there's always uh, a humbleness or a want to learn more. I
Mm,
haven't yet heard of the folks. No one in open source is saying this is the only way, the right way, and we have
yeah,
done it and solved it for everything. Even
yeah,
the folks who are sending 7 petabytes a day are very curious on other uses and
sure,
what's going
sure.
on.
Yeah. So here's my thought is how do you help out some of our developers out there that they're convinced that Calyptia is and the tooling there is the solution that they need to help accelerate their work, but they find themselves in a larger organization. Let's pretend it's a more regulated company where bringing in open source might have some challenges. How can those developers kind of speak to management to say like, hey, the pains that we've been talking about, this is how this will solve it,
Yeah.
because I think that's important. I think sometimes the two speak different languages and they almost like misinterpret the signals. So how would you kind of coach those developers who are kind of sold on the solution but want to bring it in house?
Yeah, very good question. From our side as Calyptia, when developers are doing POCs with us and they want to show their organization, their boss, what's going on, the way that we like to relay, hey, one, you're already using a lot of this technology. Right? Many times, folks might already have FluentBit in place, and if they don't have FluentBit in place, what we like to do with Calyptia solutions. By the way, we have two major ones. One is Calyptia FluentBit, your kind of traditional enterprise version of FluentBit, and then we have
Hmm.
Calyptia Core, which is an orchestrated plug and play. You can install on a virtual machine. You can install it on top of Kubernetes and has a nice management UI for managing all this. And as I speak about the latter, I think that tends to be one of the more popular routes. Is the manager also always wants to see what the ROI is of using a tool like this, and especially with things like FluentBit, open source, FluentD, these are very terminal friendly, everything is code tools, and it's sometimes hard to show a manager like, you see this line of code, it's saving us 20%
Yeah,
of our bill.
yeah.
Now on the Calyptia core side, that's where Calyptia plugs into what's on open source or plugs into your environment, and then we show you visually, here's the graph, here's how much you're saving, here's how much you could predict to save over time.
Yeah.
Here's a visual representation of all of the configuration that the team has built. And we've seen folks that might have 1,000 lines of configuration, but no one has any idea how this thing is routed, how everything is connected together. And with
Yeah.
Calyptia, we aim to make it very simple. You could copy paste it. We have free tools online if you want to try that, or Calyptia
Hmm.
Core where we'll visualize it immediately for you. You have a visual editor for all these things. And I think the second part from a manager side is like, great, this thing looks cool. I can see the value, but how does my organization start to utilize that? And I think to one of your earlier points, the developer experience becomes super important.
Yeah.
And from our side, it's not just about having that UI that's great to view and integrate and a good starting point, but having that deep CLI, having everything API based, making things as object. We all come from a kind of Kubernetes object background, and so we try to disseminate our like least operating patterns. So in Calyptia Core, instead of calling it Fluent Bits, this is all the Fluent Bits you operate, we call it pipelines. And within pipelines, they have scale, they have endpoints, they have things that are a little easier to understand, especially if you're coming outside from the Fluent ecosystem. But if you
Hmm.
do come from the Fluent ecosystem, it's again it's a very easy transition or very easy to understand what's going on there too.
That's excellent. Yeah, and I think your point is very valid. As a leader, I think they get a bad rap sometimes. The pointy-haired boss. They only want to report. What I often find with leaders that I speak with is they're trying to think about the organization and explain like these large organizations, right? They have a lot of applications across different technical stacks, and there's those. We won't call them legacy. We'll call them mature applications that have to modernize as well. So now they're trying to figure out like, okay, if I have these teams, I want to create a great developer experience and I want to move them onto this new technology. How do I do that? So I think kind of what you were saying there too is if a development team can show that and share that in an organization, like, hey, here was our journey for moving our application stacks. That's actually a great way, even internally inside of a company, to share knowledge and information.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think as users start onboarding like to both open source and to enterprise solutions, what we'll typically see is that isn't something that you have to start in one place or you won't be successful.
Mm.
You can start in all different corners. We'll have folks that will start purely on they don't want any hassle of trying to figure it out themselves with open source, and that's perfectly fine, right? Time is very valuable to them. They have a really
Yep.
core problem. Let's start with enterprise. We want someone who's on the call to give us guidance and get it set up. And then you have the other organizations that's like, no, we want to try to figure this out. We want to commit. We want to contribute, and we want to now have a kind of direct line either to maintainers or folks in case we want to get features in there that we'll contribute ourselves. And so both are very valid. And both very important to a healthy developer experience. But yeah, they're vastly different depending on who those users are.
Right, right. And I guess the my last question is really if I'm a leader in an organization, what would you recommend in terms of, what should I be listening for in this area of observability? We've been talking a lot about a lot of different things today, but what would you say is the one or two key kind of things that I would hear from my development teams that says, well, I got to take a look at this thing called observability and really invest some time and energy there?
Yeah, I I think observability absolutely has a bad rap of being purely reactive. So, for example, if I'm a leader and my services aren't operating healthy, I'm not hitting those 99.9 SLA, or maybe I don't even have an SLA or SLO defined. There's this this view of observability that it's only to make sure that things are up and running, or if things are going down, I can fix it really rapidly. But I would emphasize for a leader, as you're hearing engineers that are using software, that are shipping software, they should have some strategy to make sure that things are up and running. It shouldn't be a fully reactive piece. It should be almost part of the development process.
Mhm.
It's just like when you ship a product, you're not just viewing, okay, I shipped the product, and if it sells, great. If it doesn't, you want to see how folks are using it, how folks are interacting with it. What is the value piece inside of it? Similarly here with software, you want to be able to see, hey, is this thing operating correctly? Is it performing as I intend? Or is it delivering the experience that we expect? And yeah, I would emphasize that for leaders to not think of observability as reactive.
That's a really, really great point. Yeah, right. Well, it's so much better to be in front of if you are going to have issues, or even just understanding and being able to make changes quickly and pivot and concepts like that. Right. That's what every organization wants to do. So
Um,
excellent. Well, thank you for your time today. I think these are some amazing insights. So I really appreciate it.
yeah, thank you. I really appreciated being here.